How to play Steam Noir Revolution. The game lasts for 12 rounds. Each round represents 1 week, and the objective of the game is for your faction to have the most influence in the revolution after 3 months. Alternatively, if the revolution fails, you want your faction to be the least represented. Components: 5 victor cards. These 5 cards represent the 5 factions. Each player starts with one of these cards and keeps it a secret from the other players. Faction cards. Players play 3 of these cards each round to represent how much each faction supports the revolution that week. Each faction has 13 cards with values ranging from 4 to 8. Reinforcement cards. These are played the same as faction cards, but are attached to already played cards. They increase the value of the card by 3. They can be placed on any faction card regardless of who played it or how many reinforcement cards are already attached. 5 revolution cards. These cards represent the revolution. Each week, a different faction will get a +3 bonus. Emperor cards. These cards represent the Emperor's strength. With 4 players, a +5 card is added each week, and with 5 players, it's a 10+ card. Score track and markers. Each week, the strongest faction moves a card to the score track, and the faction scores points equal to the card's value. Markers keep track of the faction's and Emperor's scores. Point tokens. Players earn these tokens in several ways. They are added to the final score of a player's faction. Temporary support card set. Each player gets a set of 5 cards featuring the factions to use every month as a way to score extra point tokens. Setup. First, it is helpful to assign tasks to 3 players to keep gameplay moving quickly. One should be in charge of dealing and the draw pile, one should be in charge of shuffling and the discard pile, and one should be in charge of organizing the revolution pile, emperor pile, and score track. The organizer places 4 emperor cards face down in the emperor pile and 4 revolution cards in the revolution pile. The rest are set aside for now. The 5+ or 10+ emperor cards are placed for 4 or 5 players respectively. Each player draws 1 victor card and places it face down in front of them. This is the faction the player wants to win in the end. Each player is dealt 9 hand cards. They choose 2 to pass to the player to their left, pick up the 2 from the player to their right, and then discard 2, starting the game with 7 cards in their hand. Gameplay. Every 4 rounds, or weeks, is a month. At the beginning of each month, each player secretly chooses 1 faction from their 5 temporary support cards and places it face down on the top of their temporary support pile. This card represents which faction the player thinks will be the strongest in the coming month. At the beginning of each week, turn over the top Revolution and Emperor cards. All players choose 1 card from their hand and at the same time, place the card face up pointing at the Revolution card or the Emperor card. Players may support the Emperor only 1 time each week. The strength of the Emperor is the Emperor cards plus any traitor faction cards. The strength of the factions are the combined strength of each faction's cards minus the value of any traitor cards from that faction. Players repeat this process 2 more times each week. Players should collaborate in between playing cards to prevent one faction from becoming too strong or to thwart the plans of a traitor. Of course, it's okay to mislead your opponents in this discussion. After players have played 3 cards, the week ends and weekly scoring takes place. Weekly scoring. First, determine which faction is the strongest this week. Remember, any traitor cards reduce their faction's strength. So workers are the strongest this week. The player who supported this faction the most gains 2 point tokens. The tokens are placed on the temporary support pile. The player who played the single highest card, including attached reinforcement cards, for the strongest faction earns 1 point token. In the case of ties, all tied parties receive point tokens. If one player supported more than 1 tied faction the most, they receive points for each tied faction. Next, the strength of the strongest faction is compared to the Emperor's strength. If the Emperor is stronger, then the Emperor card is moved to below the score track, and the Emperor's score marker is moved according to the value of the card. If the faction is stronger, the player who most supported the faction moves one of the faction's cards they played for the revolution to below the score track and moves the faction's score marker accordingly. In case of tied factions, including with the Emperor, a card from each faction is scored. In case of a tie between players, both may simultaneously place a faction card below the score track to be scored. Reorganize. After the weekly scoring, all trader cards and played reinforcement cards are moved to the discard pile. Each player may pick up one card they played and return it to their hand. All other played cards are discarded. Players may discard from their hand any number of cards and redraw cards back to 7. If the draw pile is ever exhausted, it is replaced with the shuffled discard pile. The Revolution card and unscored Emperor card are set aside. The top cards on these piles are flipped over. If the Revolution pile is empty, 4 weeks has passed and it is the end of the month. Monthly scoring. At the end of the month, players reveal their top temporary support card. Then they add up all the values on the cards below the score track for each faction. Players add any score tokens they earned that month to the supported faction's monthly score. Whichever faction has the highest for the month wins the month. If any players temporarily supported the winning faction, they earn extra points. If only one player did, they earn 6 point tokens. If 2 players did, they earn 3 points each. 3 players earn 2 points, and 4 or 5 players earn 1 point each. If no one did, then no extra points are earned. All point tokens earned so far are moved to the secret victor card, but should still be visible for all other players to see. The revealed temporary support cards are removed from the game, and players choose a new faction to temporarily support in the next month, placing it face down on top of the pile. All scored faction cards below the score track are moved to above the score track, and all Revolution cards and all remaining Emperor cards are shuffled, and 4 more cards are placed in each stack again. If the Emperor cards are ever exhausted, then no trader cards can be played. The next month begins and is played the same as the month before. After the 3rd month ends and is scored, it is time for the final scoring. Each player reveals their secret victor card and adds all their earned point tokens to that faction's final score, moving the score marker accordingly. There are 3 possible scenarios to determine the winner. If a faction's score marker is higher than the Emperor's, the player with that faction as their secret victor card wins, unless the winning faction is 15 or more points ahead of the second place faction. If this is the case, then it is seen as too ambitious and is immediately deposed by the other factions, meaning that the faction in second place wins. If the Emperor marker is in the same place or higher than all the faction markers, then the revolution has failed and the player whose faction has the lowest score wins. The tiebreaker for a victorious revolution is to compare who has the least amount of points, counting only revolution cards and not point tokens. The tiebreaker for a failed revolution is whoever has the most points from faction cards, not including score tokens. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this review helpful. Please subscribe and like on Facebook for more how to play videos, game reviews, and how to win videos.